Shalom and good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Roy Thurley, the current chairman of Love Never Fails, a UK alliance of Christian Israel-related ministries. For over 20 years, our alliance has sought to recognise and make amends for the terrible history of Christian anti-Semitism here in Britain over many centuries, and also in Israel, particularly under the British Mandate. It's so good to see many friends here from the Christian and Jewish communities and others with an interest in the history of Britain and Israel. We especially want to welcome those who themselves were on the Patria ship and their families. Aliza and Gidon, Dan, Nurit, and Ofra. We are honoured to have you with us and those others who are joining us for this webinar. I'm delighted to introduce our two hosts today, both of whom are part of Love Never Fails. Firstly, Rosie Ross. Rosie leads a small ministry, Repairing the Breach, which has grown out of her role representing LNF at different ceremonies in Israel relating to the British Mandate. Rosie has lived in Jerusalem for 20 years and is presently living in Norfolk, England. Secondly, Sister Glory, who is a member of the Evangelical Sisterhood of Mary based at Radlett in Hertfordshire. The organisation was founded in Germany by Basileia Schlink in 1948 to express repentance to the Jewish people for the way they were treated by the Germans during the Second World War. Sister Glory has stepped in at the last moment to replace Anne Healis from Northern Ireland, who was injured in a car accident on Tuesday and is now recovering in hospital. Anne leads Nachamu Ami, Comfort My People, a small ministry dedicated to bringing comfort to those who suffered under the British Mandate. She has put a huge amount into this webinar and is sorely missed. Today, 29th of November, is a special date in the Israeli calendar, as it is the date when many remember the passing of the UN resolution in November 1947, which recommended the partition of Western Palestine into a Jewish state and a second Arab state. This decision was greeted with joy by many in the Jewish community, with dancing in the streets in Jerusalem. However, our reason for meeting today is that 4 days ago, Israel marked the 80th anniversary of another event during the British Mandate that is much less well known, but deserves greater recognition than it has thus far received. The sinking of the Patria ship, carrying hundreds of refugees from Europe, all on the British watch, is the story we will tell today. We will end our time together with the way in which that anniversary was commemorated in Israel. Before we do that, let us start with a word of prayer. Lord God of Israel, we come before you this day to acknowledge, first of all, that the Jewish people are your chosen people and that you have given them the land of Israel for their dwelling place on earth. It is you, O Lord, who set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel. We thank you, O God, for your blessing and protection upon Israel this day. Father, as we consider today the events of 80 years ago, help us to understand more about the sinking of the Patria and the circumstances which led up to it. Help us also as we hear the stories of some of the survivors of this tragedy, that we might even now be a comfort to them. Please be with all those who are contributing to this webinar, whether on screen or behind the scenes, bringing comfort to those who mourn. Please also be with Anne Healis as she recovers from her accident and restore her to full health. Amen. Now over to you, Rosie.
Good afternoon. In November 2013, we screened the film The Forsaken Promise in Jerusalem for the first time in Hebrew. We invited those who suffered under the British mandatory rule. As I welcomed people at the door, I met a special couple, Gidon and Eliza Ramati, a couple who have since become as family to me. Gidon and Eliza have a very special connection to the Patria story, as we will hear. But first, I would like to ask Gidon to lead us in prayer from Israel. My husband Colin will read the English translation afterwards.
אמרת לאברהם, לך לך מארצך וממולדתך, מבית אביך אל הארץ אשר אראך. אברהם שמע, עזב את ארצו ומשפחתו, ובא אל הארץ אשר בחרת. מאז אנחנו כאן, בארץ מולדתנו, הארץ שהשם נתן לאברהם. כולנו תפילה, שיבואו ימים טובים על כולנו, שלא יישא גוי אל גוי חרב, ולא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. שחיתתו חרבותיהם לעתים, וחניתותיהם לבטלו. ימים של שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, יאמרו אמן.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You said to Abraham, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. Genesis 12, verse 2. Abraham listened and left his country and his family and came to the land which you chose. Since then, we've been here in our homeland, the land that the Lord gave Abraham. We all pray that good days will come for us all. As Isaiah says, and they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. Days of peace for us and for all Israel. Amen.
Amen.
We are now going to see a clip from the film The Forsaken Promise, produced by Hugh Kitson. This 3-hour documentary examines Britain's conduct of the Mandate and the betrayal of the Jewish people in some detail. And it is a great help in understanding the situation in which the tragedy of the Patria took place. The film was made 15 years ago, and many of the people who took part are no longer with us, including Annie Groner, who was a witness of the Patria disaster and was deported to Mauritius for 5 years, and Yossi Harel, who was the commander of the Exodus operation in 1947. They both appear in this clip.
The MacDonald White Paper of 1939 would seal the fate of European Jewry. It effectively blocked their escape route from the impending Holocaust. For the hundreds of thousands of Jews trying to escape the inferno they knew was descending upon them, there was nothing to lose but to try to reach the historic Jewish homeland in what was then known as Palestine in any way possible. The Jewish Agency in Palestine, together with the underground organizations, had little option but to bring home the Jews in a clandestine operation called Ha'apala.
The clandestine ha'apala toward, or clandestine immigration toward Israel, it started July 1934, the first Ma'apilim ship, Velos. It's ended on May 1948 with the Declaration of Israel. We had the ha'apala mainly by sea, and we had a few by air, and a couple of thousand who came by land. The whole ha'apala together is about 130,000 Ma'apilim.
The illegal immigrants, as the British referred to them, had one major obstacle: the Royal Navy.
So there were about 60 ships before the war, small ships. Most of them were intercepted by the Navy.
ואנשים שניסו להגיע באופן בלתי לגלי ובפחותות האחרונים, אז לא פעם כשנתפסו והוחזרו, התאבדו, שלא היה להם שום טעם בחיים.
The war started, Second World War, so the most pressing thing was to bring the Jews.
I believe that if the gates were open, as they should be, as as the Declaration of Balfour, if it would have really been the national house for Jews, very many Jews would have survived and were live today with us here in Israel or any other place. But it's not only the locked gates of Israel, the influence of England at the time over other countries was strong enough for not permit immigrants, Jewish immigrants, to enter into their countries.
The diplomatic pressure on countries like Italy, Greece, Romania, Turkey was enormous. Yugoslavia was enormous. And the British ambassador, 50% of our activities in those countries were on this subject for illegal immigration. But they couldn't stop us because the need was such. There was no other option.
With the outbreak of war, the Jewish battle for survival off the shores of their promised land became more desperate. The British government wanted to send a clear signal to the Jews of Europe. The gates of Palestine were closed. However, instead of returning the Jews to a certain death in Europe, Britain interned them. The year before the war began, the British had built a detention camp on the coast at Atlit. For the final 10 years of the mandate, it served as the main detention camp for Jews on the soil of Eretz Israel. The less fortunate were deported and imprisoned elsewhere. One family among the many thousands was the Groner family.
It was on the 3rd of September 1940. I left Bratislava to go to Israel.
Annie escaped down the river Danube with her husband Paul to the Black Sea. From Constanza, they sailed on the Atlantic with more than 1,800 other Jewish refugees crammed on board.
And near Cyprus, the British Navy take us to Israel because we are Jew and take us to a prison. First to Atlit and after 8 days to Mauritius.
The Atlantic arrived in Haifa escorted by the Royal Navy in November 1940. Two other ships, the Milos and the Pacific, had arrived some weeks earlier carrying another 1,800 refugees between them. The British authorities decided to deport the refugees from all three ships to Mauritius aboard a much larger ship, the Patria. The refugees from the earlier ships had been transferred and waited for the Atlantic to arrive. The Haganah attempted to disable the ship with an explosive charge to the hull. The Patria capsized and sank with the loss of 280 Jewish lives. Annie Gronner and her husband were waiting on the Atlantic to be transferred to the Patria when the explosion took place. 65 years later, she visited the clandestine immigration museum for the first time, only to be confronted with the memory of what happened.
It was minutes. The first young people go with, every 10 minutes go a little ship to bring us to the Patria. And after 5 minutes, the Patria, it was not Patria. I told my husband, where is the ship? We have not a ship. The ship was gone. Now I see how she was gone.
All the refugees were interned in Atlit. The British authorities were determined to make an example of them and deport them. Among them, Annie Gronner and her husband. Today, as a widow, she still bears the emotional scars of losing her family in the Holocaust and Britain's harsh treatment of her and her people.
I can't understand after the so many troubles why they are doing it. For what? For what we must pay such a, they stole me 5 years of my life. 5 years of, I was 20 years old. Can't understand.
The Atlit team who work at the former Atlit detention camp have done a great deal of work in recording the stories of the Ma'apilim, both from the Patria ship and many, many other ships. We're going to hear about some of the research that Rena Offenbach, the chief historian there, has been doing. She's recently uncovered some interesting facts about the Patria and the history surrounding it. You will see that some of the information quoted on our flyer about crew and British soldiers is open to question. We have been glad to get to know Rena and the rest of the team at Atlit over many years. Many of us from Love Never Fails have been traveling there since 2001. We look forward to growing cooperation with Atlit in serving the Ma'apilim who are still alive and honouring the memory of those who have died. Ma'apilim can loosely be translated as those climbing a mountain. British history terms them the illegal immigrants, but this is far from the truth. Ma'apilim is a much fairer and truer term.
It remains something of a mystery exactly how many people died in the Patria disaster. Rena Offenbach, Director of Research at Atlit, says that different researchers give the figures at between 220 to 300 people, but more suggesting at least 250 and several suggesting exactly 267. Jewish culture is remarkable for the importance given to honouring each individual, so that the dead are not just a number, but each should be recognised and remembered by name. It is therefore astonishing that 80 years on from the disaster, so much remains unknown. Maybe it will remain unknown. Yet Rina is seeking to narrow that margin of uncertainty. Although searches continued in the wreck of the Patria ship in Haifa port throughout 1941, it is believed that there were bodies which were never recovered. The Haifa cemetery contains 218 graves, 21 of whom are of unrecognized bodies. In addition, there are 2 graves in the British cemetery in Haifa of 2 British policemen who lost their lives. However, it is not clear whether the intended British crew was already on board the Patria at the time of the disaster. Beyond the 2 policemen, were there other British casualties? A large number of French and Indo-Chinese crew members had been on the ship and were deported when the British requisitioned the Patria for their own uses. But 38 crew were retained. What happened to them? Were they still on board at the time of the disaster? Beyond these questions of the identity and number of victims, there remain questions regarding the intended purpose of the Patria's voyage, if it had not been sunk. We know that Mauritius was the planned destination, but is it possible, as some of the evidence suggests, that the British intended to take some of the immigrants even further on from Mauritius to Trinidad? Rina herself has uncovered an original document showing that the British were planning to take 800 of the Jewish immigrants to Trinidad, subject to the agreement of the governor of the island.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you very much, Rina, for this important research and for all the work that is done at ACLIT. And now I'm really taking Anne's place in welcoming Gidon, but I'm very happy to do this because I had the joy and privilege of meeting and coming to know Gidon and Eliza and meeting them several times in Israel and in the UK. Our first meeting was in 2015 at the Dock of Tears at Haifa Port, when Gidon shared some of his amazing story. I was deeply moved, and I'm so glad that he will share it with us now. His story is also told in detail in the book Eliza has written, Where Are You, My Child? And Anne did an amazing, excellent job arranging the translation and publication in English. Welcome, Gidon.
נובמבר 1940, 3 ספינות עם כ-3,600 מעפילים שנמלטו מאירופה מציפורני הנאצים מגיעות לחיפה, לאחר 3 חודשים של הפלגה בתנאים קשים. על אחת הספינות, אטלנטיק שמה, הייתי אני, תינוק בן 3 חודשים, הוריי ודודיי עם תינוק שלהם. הבריטים עצרו את הספינות רחוק מהחוף, כדי שאף מעפיל לא יקפוץ למים וישחה לחוף. הם הודיעו למעפילים שהם יגורשו לאי מאוריציוס. אונייה צרפתית גדולה שנשאה את השם פטריה, עגנה בנמל חיפה והייתה מיועדת לגרש אותנו. כ2,000 מעפילים משתי האוניות שהגיעו לפנינו כבר הועברו אל הפטריה. ב-25 בנובמבר 1940 הבריטים החלו להעביר את המעפילים מהאונייה שלנו, האטלנטיק, לאוניית הגירוש פטריה. ביניהם אמי ואיתה אני וחברתה עם התינוקת שלה. שאר בני המשפחה שלנו אמורים היו להגיע אחרינו. ארגון ההגנה שביקש למנוע את הגירוש החדיר חומר נפץ לפטריה בכוונה לגרום נזק קל. חצי שעה לאחר שעלינו לפטריה נשמע פיצוץ אדיר, ובתוך כ-20 דקות הפטריה התהפכה והחלה טובעת. 260 מעפילים ואנשי צוות טבעו ביניהם גם חנה, חברתה של אמי וביתה התינוקת. אמא ואני בידיה הצלחנו להינצל. אני ניצלתי על ידי אדם שלקח אותי וקפץ איתי למים. אמי הועברה למחנה המעפילים בעתלית וחיפשה אותי. לאחר 3 ימים במרפאה של מחנה צבא בריטי על הכרמל, שם אושפזתי בגלל שהייתי פצוע וגם עם כוויות ממי הים. שהינו בעתלית 9 חודשים. ומה קרה עם אבא שלי? 1,600 המעפילים שנותרו על האטלנטיק ולא הועברו לפטריה, הוגלו למאוריציוס. ביניהם היה גם אבא שלי ובני משפחה נוספים. התנאים במאוריציוס היו מאוד קשים, ורבים חלו במלריה ובמחלות נוספות. 128 נפטרו ונקברו שם. כעבור 1.5 שנה של גלות במאוריציוס, הבריטים הודיעו שכל מי שמוכן להתנדב לצבא הבריטי ולעזור במלחמה בנאצים, יוכל לעזוב את האי. אבא שלי עם עוד כ-300 בחורים התנדבו ועברו אימונים בדרום אפריקה, קרוב לדרבן, לקראת צאתם למלחמה. אבא שלי הוצב בגדוד תותחני נ"מ, עבר למצרים, וכעבור זמן הוצב בחיפה, שממנה גורש למאוריציוס לפני יותר מ2 זאת כדי להגן על בתי הזיקוק מפני התקפות המטוסים הגרמנים. אבא הצליח לאתר את אמא והודיע לה שהוא נמצא בחיפה. אמא לקחה אותי ונסענו לבקר את אבא. הייתי אז כבר בן 3, וכשפגשתי את אבי לראשונה מאז שגורש, שאלתי את אמא, מי זה החייל הזה? אני מבקש להודות בקרב לב לכל האנשים, ובמיוחד לארגון RTB, המבקשים לכפר על הדברים הקשים שקרו בתקופת המנדט הבריטי בישראל. תודה לכם.
Thank you so much, Gidon, for sharing the story of the Patria, which is your own personal story, with all the associated pain and injustice. I'd now like us to hear from Tamar and Ofra. Tamar is another British Christian who's been called to make her home in Israel and has studied the Holocaust and particularly the story of the Patria. She will introduce her friend Ofra. Following Ofra's story, we will have a moment for a reflection during which we will hear some beautiful music. A good number of you here will remember Ruth Fazal's playing at our event at Haifa Port in 2015. We are honoured that Ruth, who's a composer and violinist who uses her gifts to honour the Jewish people, has recorded 3 short pieces, especially for our event.
Thank you. I first met Ofra, 4 years ago when I was doing my Holocaust studies. And I heard the story of her father. And it was during the time that we were actually studying how to make different exhibitions. And we had visited the athlete camp. So the whole story of the Patria was very fresh in my mind. So Ofra, just tell me about your father and
Okay.
who was he and how did he end up on the Patria?
Okay. My father was born in 1918 in Germany. His name was Heinz Schwerzens. His Hebrew name is Tzvi. And as I grew up, I remember his stories. I think it traumatized him, all his experience on the Patria. He joined the Patria with his parents. He was a youth guide at the time. And when they arrived in Palestine at the time, he was one of the leaders on the ship, and he knew that they were going to put a bomb on the Patria, but he couldn't even tell his parents what was supposed to happen, that they would have to be rescued. But he could tell them to be on the deck, like many other Ma'apilim. So when the Haganah put a bomb that went too strong, in a way, exploded very fast. My grandparents, who couldn't even swim, they had to be rescued. And my father was rescued also, but because he was one of the leaders, he was taken to Atlit with his parents. And you can imagine the horrible feelings that they had, arriving at long last after months on the journey, arriving in Atlit to a wired camp, which was like a concentration camp. And they were separated, men and women. My grandparents were in one part, or my grandfather and grandmother, who were not so old, but they were old enough not to be traumatized. They were in the camp for about between 3 and 6 months. Then they were taken to Haifa. My father had to stay in Atlit for at least 13 months until they were freed. So Tamar knows more about what happened on the way. You can perhaps tell about.
I think the journey itself, as Gideon has explained, it was 1940 when the 3 ships were requisitioned by Adolf Eichmann, and the journey itself took about 3 months. They were sent to Romania to wait for the ships to be made ready, and they didn't have even enough wood for supplying heat on the ship. They didn't have enough food on the ship. So the journey itself was a traumatic journey. And then to be intercepted by the Royal Navy.
Yeah.
I think for your father, Heinz, it was something that was a constant memory and a constant trauma throughout their lives.
Yeah.
But when they were finally released, where did your father
So what kept my father hopeful?
Yeah.
2 things happened. Before he left Germany, somebody prophesied over him that when he arrives inland, he will be stopped. He didn't know what would stop him. They gathered that it was the British. And another thing that kept him optimistic, that my mother was already in Israel. She was chosen with a group of young women to go to an agricultural school in Ben Shemen. And so she was waiting for them to arrive. Well, for more than a year, she could visit them, my father in Atlit, but over the fence. She could never get to actually meet him face to face. She had to provide for my grandparents and my father food and shoes. My grandparents lost everything on the way. Everything was stolen or disappeared. They were going to be joining a group of German Jews who established a kibbutz. So when he was released, he was with my mother joining a group of German Jews who started a kibbutz, and they were allowed to bring my grandparents. So altogether, as I remember, it was a happy end, but I remember that my father, thinking of the Patria and all the ones that have lost their lives in it, kept him, I think it affected his life very much. And the happy end is that he and my mother, when my mother was 90, 90 people were under, it produced 90 people, 90 descendants. So I want to thank you, Rosie, for organizing it. And just thank you. It's just a horrific history.
And thank you for telling the story of Heinz. Just one of so many, like you do.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you so much, Ofra, for sharing your family's story with us, the painful memories and the happy ending. Tamar, thank you for your inspiration and encouraging the story of people like Heinz to be told. Now, Dan Sheffy, we trust that you and your family are with us watching this webinar. We're so pleased that you've been able to share your story, or at least the short version, with us for today. I met you at the Patria 79th anniversary last year, and then again on a special outing that Elisa and Gidon organized. We understand that you are 95, which makes you one of the oldest Martinim from the Patria.
We were at anchor outside the port of Haifa, and suddenly we got food because they brought food. We were fed because on the way we starved. Everything turned better until we heard that inside the port of Haifa is a big ship, a 10,000-ton passenger ship with 3 big funnels, which was to take us to Mauritius, a Devil's Island at that time. Today it is a tourist paradise, but at that time there were tropical diseases and everything. We were supposed to be transferred by help of this ship to Mauritius. So they started transshipping us from outside the port, from the immigrant ships, to the ship Patria, which in the meantime was turned into a troop transporter, which transported troops from India to the Middle East, Indian troops. So this ship was stopped at Haifa, requisited, and the British authorities started transferring us from the immigrant ship to the Patria. And again, we heard rumors getting stronger and stronger that we were going to leave with the Patria to this devil's island, Mauritius. So we were surprised because when we left Austria, our dream was to meet the British, who were at that time already at war with Germany. We had hundreds of young men who were eagerly willing to join the British forces to fight with the British against the Germans. But to our surprise, they wanted to deport us. So, I mean, this is not the kind of welcome we hoped for. So, anyhow, after a few days, a sabotage act occurred. The Haganah, the Jewish underground, intended to damage the ship in order to prevent its sailing. But the charge they put probably, or the place where they put it, was too strong, and the ship sank within a few minutes. I think it took less than 10 minutes. Luckily, my parents, we had a meeting place on deck, and I was down in the ship when the explosion occurred. So after the explosion, I immediately ran and climbed up to the deck, to the place where my parents were, and I made it because in the meantime there was a panic and many people were blocking the stairs and they couldn't get out. I just made it and I joined them, and at this time the ship turned over towards its starboard side, to its right side. So my father and I helped my mother over the railing to the higher side, and then my father and I climbed over the railing because it started to lay down on its starboard side until it hit the ground. It was inside the port, so it was not very deep. So actually, there were not many people on the port side, which was outside of the water. And there was a panic, and people, even people who didn't know to swim, ran and jumped into the water. Others were locked inside in various places where they couldn't get out from. But finally, we were picked up by boats from the outside and taken to one of the stores on the shore, inside the port area. There, to our great surprise, there were British women volunteers who were already ready to serve us with tea, coffee, cakes, you name it. This was exactly the reception we expected when we came to Israel. It changed because we were in an emergency situation. And we were well served, and they also very much helped with the saving lives and taking people out of the water and so on. From this store, we were later in the evening, we were taken by buses to Atlit.
Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your personal memories of that terrible time, but with a little bit of humour really there about the British. Nurit, we know you're also with us on the webinar, and we now so look forward to hearing your story. I so remember meeting you at the 75th anniversary of the Patria, when we sat next to each other, not knowing each other. And you hugged me after I gave a formal apology for our British actions at the event in Haifa. Since then, I know you've got to know other friends from Britain, especially Alison. Nurit, you are the youngest survivor of the Patria that we know, having been 7 months in your mother's womb at the time of the disaster.
So in the year of 1939, the Nazis went into Czechoslovakia, and my parents decided to leave because they saw what is going on. You are not allowed to go with the metro, you are not allowed to go to the park and things like this. So my father, it was my father's idea. My mother did not agree with it, but at that time she could not stay pregnant without a husband. So they left, and they were 5 months on the sea till they hoped to reach Palestine, but the British, they did not let them go in. And they put them on the big ship Patria, and they wanted to send them to Mauritius. The Haganah here, they did not agree to this, and they decided to explode the engine of the ship. It did not succeed because the ship was too old and the explosive was too big. And in 12 minutes, if this is the ship turned on her side, and 12 minutes, it goes into the sea. All the people who were on this side, they could not open the door because of the water, they drowned. All the other people, they started to jump and to slide, and the British saw the big catastrophe, what happened, they started to help, and in the water, the Arab fishermen, they started to take the people out, but my mom, she was Maccabi Czechoslovakia, and my dad too. She was 7 months pregnant with me, and she jumped maybe 20 meters from the side of the ship into the water, and she started to swim. It was more than 1 kilometer, all wet, with big shoes and a coat, and dragging my dad, whose swimming was not so good, and they started to swim. And they came to the shore. The British brought big trucks and took them to, after they left Europe from the concentration camps, they brought them to Atlit, to a camp. It was not easy. But the nurse in the Atlit, she talked my mom, they did not want her to have the baby in Atlit. She had some relatives somewhere in Palestine. She said yes. And so my mom went there, and I was born in Tel Aviv, and I got a Palestinian birth certificate. So I am a Palestinian too. And then the life was nice, very nice in Tel Aviv. My dad came out when I was 8 months. He could not understand who is crying at night at first. And then I went to kindergarten, and I went to school, to a religious school, which was not like religious today. It was very quiet and nice. And I got my brother and my sister. It was a good time in Tel Aviv. And when the British left and the Independence War started, I was the first class. And my mom told me when there is an alarm to go into the meat shop, into the bread shop, and not to be in the street. And then I went to high school. It was one of the first from the municipality of Tel Aviv, and only pupils with good notes could get there, and I was one of them. And then when I finished the high school, I went to the army. I was in the artillery. It is funny to hear it today. And then when Wingate Institute went from Tel Aviv to Netanya, and my mom heard about it, she read about it, and as I was dancing ballet since I was 5, my mom sent me to the ballet. She said, go there maybe. And that's what I did. And all the pupils had to learn, first of all, first time when we got into the corridor of the school, there was a big picture of Charles Ord Wingate. And we had to learn who this man was. And we were so proud of him. Instead of everything that the British did to us, he was with us. He helped the Palmach. He was so, we were so sorry to hear that he died in a plane crash somewhere, I don't know, remember where. And then I got married with one of the friends from Wingate. We were very happy and a very nice young couple, sportsmen. And after 8 months, he was killed in the army. And after 3 years, I met my second husband. We got married. We have 2 children and 10 grandchildren. My second husband is from the concentration camp. He was there at 11, when he was 11. And that's our winning over everything.
Thank you, Ruth. And thank you, Nurit, for sharing your precious story, for honouring the memory of Ord Wingate. I'm honoured now to hand back over to Sister Glory, who shares a deep love for the Jewish people, and particularly those who suffered at the hands of our British nation.
Thank you, Rosie. On behalf of many British Christians, thank you again so much to Dan, Gideon, Ofra, and Nurit for sharing your painful and deeply moving stories with us today. It's so important for us to know what each one of you went through because of the cruel and unjust policies of our nation of Britain. we come to you and all who suffered the tragedy of the Patria in deep sorrow and shame. We can't begin to imagine how it must have been for you after all that you and your family suffered, fleeing from Nazi-occupied Europe, enduring the long and perilous boat journey to Eretz Israel, then to be told that because of the 1939 White Paper, you were not allowed to enter your own land. It was our nation of Britain which took away the last hope you had, refused to hear your cries for help, and forced you to transfer to the Patria to make another long sea journey to be exiled on the island of Mauritius. It was the harshness and utter lack of compassion shown by our British administration that created the situation in which the tragedy of the Patria could take place. Over 200 precious Jewish lives were lost. Children were orphaned, parents lost their children, and so many people were deeply traumatized. We also remember those who died on the island of Mauritius. Our nation completely betrayed the terms of the mandate, which were to provide a homeland for the Jewish people. Words are not enough to express how we feel, but we want you to know that we are deeply sorry. We are also very sorry that you have waited such a long time to hear us say this. It means so much to us that you survived and are with us today. We are so grateful that the Almighty gave you and your parents the strength to persevere and overcome such adversity, that they never gave up hope when there seemed no hope, and that He has blessed many of you with families in the land and around the world. It is our heartfelt prayer that, as it says in the Tanakh, Adonai Elohim will wipe away the tears from every face, and He will remove from all the earth the disgrace His people suffer.
We are now going to watch some footage taken on Wednesday of a ceremony at the cemetery in Haifa, where many of the victims of the Patria are buried. In the film, we will see Nurit Steiner, who addressed us a little earlier, laying a wreath. I am pleased to report that Love Never Fails was able to pay for the flowers that were placed on the graves at the cemetery. Let's watch this film together.
Angel tears, quiet tears, pretty and sad tears. The tears flow along the horizon and searching. What do they ask for? Because when the angels cry in a different world, then in this world we are much more sad. We are much more sad. Angels' tears. Why do the angels cry? Perhaps because it's not easy to be an angel in such a sad world. Because when the angels cry in a different world, then in this world we are much more sad. We are much more sad. We heard the singer Amit Shekel from the Education Corps military band singing Angels' Tears, lyrics by Dan Minister and music by Yoni Brechter. The girls who do their national service in Adli camp and the soldiers who serving in the Ha'apala and Navy Museum in Haifa laid flowers and stones on the graves of the victims of the Patria disaster.
Love never fails, מבריטניה. The flowers are courtesy of Love Never Fails from the United Kingdom.
I am honored to open this memorial service commemorating 80 years since the Patria disaster. Due to the complex and challenging times brought by the coronavirus, we gather here without a crowd in the old cemetery in Haifa for this special ceremony.
Mr. Eran Moses,
the director of Ha'apala and Navy Museum, will read the Yizkor, the prayer of remembrance. Please listen in Hebrew.
יזכור עם ישראל את קורבנות ההעפלה לארץ, מעפילים מכל הגלויות ביבשה ובים, אשר לחמו ללא מדים ונשק, והקריבו את נפשם למען העלייה לארץ ישראל. יזכור ישראל ויתברך בזרעו, ויאבל על זיו העלומים, וחמדת הגבורה, וקדושת הרצון, ומסירות הנפש, אשר נספו במערכות הכבדות. יהיו גיבורי הדרור והניצחון, הנאמנים והאמיצים, חתומים בלב ישראל, לדור דור.
For the reading of Psalm 121, we are honored to invite Cantor Yoel Baruch, formerly one of the Army Rabbinate. A song of ascents. I will lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall never slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper, the Lord is your shade by your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil, he shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. I am honored to invite Ma'apil Michael Spiegel, a survivor of the Patria, to recite Kaddish. Glorified and sanctified be God's great name throughout the world which he has created. According to his will, may he establish his kingdom in your lifetime and during your days, and within the life of the entire house of Israel, speedily and soon, and say Amen. May his great name be blessed forever and to all eternity. Blessed and praised, glorified and exalted, extolled and honoured, adored and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, beyond all the blessings and hymns, praises and condolences that are ever spoken in the world, and say Amen. May there be abundant peace from heaven and life for us and all Israel, and say Amen. I'm calling Michael Spiegel again to speak on behalf of the Patria families. Michael Spiegel, a survivor of the Patria. Michael was a year and a half old at the time of the disaster. He was saved by his grandmother, who jumped into the water with him. His grandmother, who couldn't swim, drowned and is buried in this cemetery. Michael and his mother and sister survived. Hello everyone, those who are here and those on Zoom. On behalf of the families, I would like to thank the organisers of the ceremony that commemorates 80 years since the Patria disaster. Thanks Atlas Camp and the Hapala and Navy Museum. It is very important that we remember the families who lost their loved ones in the Patria disaster and continue coming here every year with our children and our grandchildren, if possible. Thank you.
מעמד הנחת הזרים. אני מתכבדת להזמין את מר ערן מוזס, מנהל מוזיאון ההעפלה וחיל הים, להניח את זר משרד הביטחון, מוזיאון ההעפלה וחיל הים. אני מתכבדת להזמין את מר מרטין סטרופניקי, שגריר הרפובליקה הצ'כית בישראל, להניח את זר שגרירות הרפובליקה הצ'כית בישראל. I'm honored to invite Mr. Ambassador Martin Stropnicki of the Czech Republic in Israel to lay the wreath for the Embassy of the Czech Republic. אני מתכבדת להזמין את הגברת ברכה סלע,
Baraka
מזכיר העיר
Sela,
חיפה,
on behalf of the
להניח את
city of
זר
Haifa,
עיריית חיפה.
will now lay a wreath.
אני מתכבדת להזמין את הגברת זהבית רוטנברג
Yet
להניח את
Zavit
זר
Rosenberg,
המועצה
in the
לשמור
name of
אתרי
Atlit
מורשת
Camp,
בישראל,
will
מחנה
now lay a
המעפילים
wreath.
בעתלית. אני מתכבדת להזמין את הגברת נורית שטיינר, בת למעפילי הפטריה, להניח את זר המשפחות
on behalf of
השכולות.
the families to lay a wreath. There is a connection here with Nurit in our Zoom meeting, who was in her mother's womb at the time of this disaster.
אני מתקנת, ניצולה. נורית הייתה למעשה באונייה בבטן אימה. תודה. הקהל
Everyone
מתבקש
gathered is
לעמוד
requested to stand for the singing
התקווה.
of Hatikva, Israel's national anthem.
נפש יהודי הומייה ולפתי מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו התקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים.
Since meeting Aliza and Gidon 7 years ago in Jerusalem in 2013, Colin and I, Anne and other friends from the UK and elsewhere have met with them on many occasions. I remember first inviting them to our home and tasting their delicious gift of homegrown, home-roasted pecans. They have returned that gift of hospitality again and again, and many of us have very fond memories of times in their homes, including those scrumptious pecans. They are both so generous and hospitable. For us, it is such a gift of grace when we consider all that our British forebears enacted against them and their families, especially today as we think of Gidon and his family and all the other Ma'apilim who were on the Patria or who watched the tragedy unfold from the Atlantic. Many times we have celebrated the Jewish feast together, and we've nearly always sung together and often read the Bible together, speaking about our different beliefs and traditions, whether at Hanukkah and Christmas, Passover and Easter, Sukkot and Harvest, or Shavuot and Pentecost. I particularly remember one of our first times together. It was our celebration of Israeli Independence Day. As many of you know, it is such a poignant time of year as we transfer from Fallen Soldiers' Day, where we remember the loss of Israeli lives in the wars, to the celebration of the creation of the State of Israel. For those of us from Britain who know our mandate history, we can't forget that in so many ways we, the British, took the side of the Arabs leading up to the Declaration of Independence, during the War of Independence and afterwards. Therefore, it was all the more special to celebrate this holiday with our Israeli friends. In many ways, we could describe it as a day of deliverance from British betrayal and misrule. We sang many Israeli songs, including the national anthem Hatikva, which we've just sung. But at their generous request, God Save the Queen was also included. We also invited Elisa and Gidon and other survivors of the mandate, or sometimes known as the Ma'apilim, as you've heard, to England and Wales to stay in the homes of Christian friends. They shared their stories with Christians, Jews, and others who have an interest in our history with Israel. Like them, we long for many to hear their stories and the stories of others who endured the British mandate. But Elisa, you are here to speak for yourself and Gidon. It is such a pleasure to have you and Gidon here with us.
7 years ago, we received an invitation to Begin Museum in Jerusalem in order to share with very good people from all over the world and to watch Jews movie, The Forsaken Promise. In the entrance, we met a very beautiful red-haired woman. She greeted us with a smile. I gave her a book I wrote about the Patria disaster. Where are you, my child? Several days later, I received a call from a very noble woman, Anne Hillis. Anne, be healthy. We pray for you. Anne told me, I would like to translate the book. Anne worked very hard with Rosie's help, and the book has been translated. Rosie and Aver organized many meetings with British and Israeli people. We met in Aryeh home, Aryeh Itamar's home. Aryeh survived the Exodus. In Sila Ganot's home, Sila was born in detention camp on Cyprus. And in Ben Shemen, in our home, Gidon, as you know, survived the Patria disaster. We celebrated holidays together, and we have traveled to different parts of Israel together. We were invited to England and Wales too, and we were hosted and traveled there with many very, very good people. Some months ago, dear Anne called me and asked if we can make a film about the book. Where are you, my child? Dear Sila and David, our good friends, our dear children and grandchildren, Gideon and I, with the help of Athlete Camp, we did it together. I want to thank all our good friends from Israel and Britain, Ireland, Australia, and other countries, even America. Thank you for supporting Israel. The connection between us will grow. We love you and believe we will continue together to build a better future, better relationship, and more activities for Israel, our homeland. Thank you all. Here is our film with our British friends singing. Thank you very much.
3,600 immigrants who escaped from the war in Europe boarded 3 ships, the Pacific, the Milos, and the Atlantic, in order to sail to their homeland Israel. The voyage took 3 months. The Milos and the Pacific arrived at the port of Haifa first, where the immigrants were forcibly transported by British troops to the deportation ship Patria, destined for exile to Mauritius. When the Atlantic arrived, the immigrants of the other 2 ships had already been transferred to the Patria, and with 130 women and children from the Atlantic transferred, an explosion occurred. This attack by the Haganah was meant only to disrupt the deportation, but the poor condition of the Patria resulted in large damage, with the ship flooding and flipping over. In this explosion, some 260 illegal immigrants, police, soldiers, and personnel perished. 1,555 were rescued from the blast and taken to Athlete detention camp. Others were deported to Mauritius.
Leave me alone, you're hurting me. Leave me alone.
Quickly. Yes.
Meet you, my husband. Where are you? Where are you?
Come on, faster.
Where are you? Please help me. I want to know where my baby is.
Yes, keep moving.
He's only 3
Faster.
months
Quickly,
old.
quick.
Meet you. Where are you? My baby is only 3 months old.
Yes, keep moving. Faster. Keep moving.
Meet you. Where are you?
In the Athlete detention camp, their freedom was taken away from them, and they were imprisoned behind fences.
Stop! Leave me! What is that? What is that smell? I'm suffocating here. What is that? You are like the Nazis? Do we come all the way home just to suffocate?
After the disinfection process, they were housed in barracks, where dozens were crammed into each barrack, separating women and men, so that even spouses were separated.
How are you today? I'm in so much pain. It feels like my chest explodes. You know there is a baby you're crying all the time. Is that my Gideon? Where is he? Bracha. Bring Shloimele here. Come quickly. Here, raise it. It's Shloimele. He can help you. Let him breastfeed. It's not my baby. But I don't have any milk. All I have is cheese. It's so painful. Let him suck. Give it to him. Oh, it's so painful. Here, I think it's a drop of milk. I think it's starting. I want to breastfeed my Gidile. And Rebecca too. Rebecca, the little one, she stayed down with her mom. Hannah had no power to go up. They must have both drowned.
And you managed to get up with the baby?
Yes, and when the water washed over me, I almost drowned. I quickly delivered my baby to a guy who yelled at me, "Quickly, Harry, give me the baby. Jump immediately." I jumped, and then the ship flipped. Pieces of barrel and lumber fell. I almost drowned. My eyes were full of blood. But I looked up to see the guy who took my baby. And then I settled back into the water. I swallowed a lot of water.
And how did you get to the beach?
A boat came to me. Someone spoke to me in Arabic. He pulled me over and he brought me to the beach.
Maybe the baby was saved. You have to believe. You'll see it will be okay.
What okay? There is no okay here. Only 19 years old and already lost a husband and a child.
Don't despair. Maybe...
I know Mitsu stayed on the Atlantic. He did not reach to the Patria. And now I don't know anything about him. Bring me back, Shloimeh. It helps me.
How are you, lady?
Everything is so painful.
Here, soon the doctor will check you.
Okay.
Rizale?
Yes.
Yes, you have high fever.
Okay.
Here,
No.
take this pills.
No, I just need to breastfeed the baby. It helps me.
Take it.
No.
Okay? I hope you will feel better.
Thank you.
What happened to you? Your hands are blue and full of wounds.
What happened to me? You, the British soldiers, held me so tight. I tried to kick them, but I had no power. I kept my baby from falling out of my hands. And they managed to take me to the deportation ship. And now I don't know where my baby is. Please help me.
How are you this morning?
I want to know about my baby.
We don't know, but a message came from the British Army clinic
What?
about children coming to the hospital after the blast.
I want to go there.
Also, some babies too.
I want to go there right now.
How?
Just let me get out of here. I will find a way.
Lady, patience.
What patient? I have no patience.
The routine of the camp was conducted under the watchful eye of British soldiers. And between the washing, there were protests and demonstrations. But their hope for freeing themselves from this place was not lost.
Reizele, look, you've got a letter. Look, Reizele is full of stamps. The letter is from Mityu, my husband. Wow, from Mauritius Island? Yes. Reizele, my rose, I miss you so much. I heard that you arrived to Atlit camp, and you stayed there 9 months, and then moved to Kibbutz Gvaram. Did our Gidi survive the blast of the Patria? Is he with you? I have interesting news. You will not believe it. After 18 months in this awful place here in Mauritius, an English officer asked us to volunteer for the British Army. They need us as reinforcements in the war against the Germans. Sure, I volunteered, just to get out of this prison, to get out. My brother-in-law, Joseph, also volunteered. Poor Dinchu. She stayed there on this island with her little boy, and without Joseph. My sister Dinchu. When will I see her? They are sending me to an anti-aircraft combat course. Yes, they need the force to stop the aircraft attacks on the refineries in Haifa port. So there is a chance I will get to Haifa. Maybe I will see you. This is my dream. I want to see you already in our Gidile. I am praying. A warm hug for me.
We, the actors in this short film, are the grandchildren of Aliza and Gideon Ramati. All of us are living in Israel and proud of our family that was started by our great-grandparents after all their suffering.
If you want to know how Rezale found their baby Gideon, you can read it in a book that Grandma Aliza wrote, Where Are You, My Child? Thank you all for what you do for Israel.
Shalom Aleinu, Ya'akol Yisrael, Ya'aseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu, Ya'akol Yisrael, Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom.
I think you'll agree that's a very special film that's been put together by Sila and Aliza and Gideon and the family. And it was lovely. I expect you recognise some of the British faces too. And thanks to Anne, who really was the one behind that venture. Sister Glory has thanked all our Marpilim friends for sharing their stories, and I want to echo those thanks. I'm thankful too to everyone who's helped prepare for this webinar, especially Anne, who so sadly cannot be with us. Also to Roy, Sister Glory, and all the members of Love Never Fails who supported us. We're thankful too to Mike McNally from March of Life, who's overseen many technical aspects behind the scenes. Thank you, Lynn, too, for your prayers and suggestions, and to all those who've prayed and given helpful advice about this special event. Thank you to each one of you who's there behind the screen for joining us. Thank you, Colin, for all your support and for stepping in to help when the pressure's been on. And for all those lovely meals you've cooked while I've been busy on the computer. Rafi and Tamar and others in Israel who'll be joining you, I'd like to thank you for continuing the work of this webinar when you joined the athlete team this week in going to the homes of Patria Marpilim with a message from Love Never Fails and flowers. But above all, let's thank God for allowing us to share this special remembrance time together and look forward to the future in hope. I'm just going to read one verse from Isaiah 51, verse 3. For the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and thanksgiving will be found in it, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. So that's for those in Israel, Yeshayahu Nun Aleph. verse 3. So if you would like to stay in touch, please contact us by email. We will be in touch again soon with special news about a new film about the Mauritius detention. The Hitra Arts.